back for 9/11. They were confusing people, I think on purpose, to gin up and to be able to go through this war. One final question, then we're going to open it up. Somebody asked me yesterday in the hall, a reporter, are you planning on doing a war powers resolution on some of the other places, Somalia, Mali? And I think it's a good idea and worth entertaining. My question to you is, do you think we can keep the coalition together? Because even in Yemen, people exempted out Al-Qaeda. They're going to argue that Somalia is about Al-Qaeda, although I think Somalia is about a long-standing civil war. We should have a debate. Even if you think it is Al-Qaeda, we need to have a debate to say, I think these people are plotting to come and, wreak havoc in America. Are they really a threat to us? Could we aid some people around them? Do we really need to be in the middle of Somalia? What do you think happens if we were to have a war powers vote on Somalia?
Well, I think we would we'd make some progress on it, because I think there's huge frustration around the world in terms of how we're getting into conflicts and not doing all the analysis, not being fair with the American people in terms of sharing the true reasons that we're there. But we need to study carefully which one we pick next, to go forward. Visit what Rand's really good at doing, both of us, visiting across the aisle, talking with folks as to what they feel about the issue, and then taking that back and revamping and moving in the direction. But I would hope that many of these areas where we don't have a AUMF, where we don't have a declaration of war, we ought to be pushing the envelope.
And also, and something new came out of this, because about a year and a half ago, we started pushing resolutions to disapprove of arms sales to Saudi Arabia. These are privileged resolutions, which mean you get to vote on them. Most things, if I've got an idea and I submit a bill like our bill on ending the Afghan war, they're not going to let us vote on it. They have all the power, we don't. But there are certain privileged votes, and one of them is on arms sales, and then the other's on this War Powers Act. So if we decided to put something forward on Somalia, they can't stop us. And they hate it because we take the agenda out of leadership in both parties, and then we direct the floor for a few days, and we try to get the attention of the media to discuss these important issues. That's one sad thing, though. You're talking about war and peace, and we're not going to send our young men and women to war, and yet we're too busy. The news channels, we won't get into it, but they're obsessed with other things other than war and peace and I think important issues. With that, why don't we open it up for questions? Scott,
Thank you. Scott McConnell, the American Conservative. I'd asked this question before to people, but never to someone so authoritative. I was very alarmed by your comments about the possibility of war with Iran. And it strikes me that one, Iran is kind of or partially a democratic country, unlike Saudi Arabia. And so my question is, who is it that gets to decide that Saudi Arabia, which contributed to the 9/11 terrorists, is a friend and that Iran is an enemy? How is that decided?
I think, first of all, the place we ought to start, is there are not necessarily, when you look at countries, that we should drop into categories and just say they're an enemy, we never talk with them, we never have any dealings with them. I would make the argument on Iran, and I don't think I've talked to Rand about this and be interested in his thoughts on that, but Iran, in terms of its approach on the issues and where it's coming from, and there are many, and if you go to the Iranian people, there are huge, what I would call sympathies towards the West. And we have a large Iranian diaspora here in the United States of America, where there's a lot going on back and forth and a lot of discussion. So I think that if you look at our foreign policy, and one of the things I really like about Rand is when he looks at history over the long term, Why is Iran so empowered right now? It's because we went into Iraq. Both of those countries were enemies of each other, or kind of a counterforce to each other. They actually fought a war before we went in. And then we took out Saddam Hussein. The militias and the Shiite militias in Iraq are now very friendly, and there's a lot of interaction going on. So I think if we intervene like that, we should make sure that we're doing it for a purpose and we don't have the unintended consequences. Over to you.
Well, who should decide? Obviously, the Constitution says Congress should decide, and unfortunately, many of these decisions are made by a single individual, and that gets back to the whole problem.
Right.
I think that we look at the Middle East through a skewed lens. Every day you hear Iran is the largest state sponsor of terrorism. And it's sort of like a bromide. It's been said over and over again, so it must be true, and maybe it is true, I don't know. But what I think is that Iran and Saudi Arabia are different, but both equally and possibly are creating problems in the Middle East. Iran is a regional player predominantly, where there are Shiite minorities. They either are protecting them or trying to get them into power within their countries. Saudi Arabia, I think the problem is bigger. So I say, because I try to play off of the way we describe Iran, I say, well, Saudi Arabia is the largest state sponsor of worldwide jihadism. And I think that is true. They teach hatred of the West, of Christianity, of Hindus, of Jews, everywhere. Most of the people fighting in Pakistan are trained in madrasas funded by the Saudis. Tens of thousands of madrasas in Pakistan. Indonesia, which is the largest Muslim nation, actually has a much more, I would say, it's from someone who's not Islamic, but has, I think, a more moderate form of Islam and always has. And yet, I think they've been infected by the Wahhabism of the Saudis. And so, I think it is different when we talk about regime change. Some people say, well, if you're a libertarian or non-interventionist, you should be fair to Saudi Arabia. Well, fair means that I'm not for regime change in Saudi Arabia, but I am for withholding arms. So, I mean, we don't have a right to our arms. And in fact, if there's one uniquely private industry that also really, I think, has a public purpose, that's our arms. So not anybody should go buy an F-35. I like the idea that we're now looking at restricting the sale to Turkey. Arms should be contingent upon behavior. But I do worry that people think that just the president gets to decide whether to go to war in Iran, and that is a problem. And so we have to have these debates back and forth and try to grab back that power. The vote on Yemen was an attempt to really have Congress grab back that power.
All right, we have time for one more question.
Hi, I'm Kimberly Dvorak. I have a question here. If we want to kind of end all of this, all of these covert wars, isn't the first thing we need to do stop the funding for it? And what are your comments on the president using the Overseas Contingency Act to get around the budgetary numbers that are actually fueling these wars?
I would say yes, funding is we should discontinue funding. I will tell you, though, that some on the other side will say, well, the declaration of war never meant what you think it means, and it really is anachronistic, or we just don't really do that anymore, but you can stop funding anytime you want. The problem with it is it's very difficult to stop funding when soldiers are in the field. So if I introduce a resolution tomorrow to say, we're just not going to pay the salaries of the soldiers in Afghanistan, it's not getting very far. I have 3 nephews in the military. I mean, it's hard to stop funding for war once people are out there. But I think even in our bill, we sort of gave them 45 days to develop a plan, and we're going to bring in troops home, and it would happen over, because it takes a while to bring everybody home anyway. So funding is more difficult. You're right, we do have the power of the purse, and we should do it. It's just more difficult politically to actually do it.
I agree with exactly what he said. I think the better approach, and remember also, there are a lot of countries in Afghanistan that are working with us. They've been our partners, they have troops on the ground. So when you do it, as we do in our resolution, where you come up with a 45-day plan, you take a year to withdraw, you allow the communication to go on between all of our allies finalized there as to how and specifically we're going to do it and who comes out when, and do it in such a way that you give the best possible chance for Afghanistan to stand up on its own.
Talking about what's going on in Africa, can we curtail this before it becomes a huge issue for us?
Well, I think funding's one way, but also probably the other way is actually bringing forward a war powers resolution saying that the president doesn't have permission to be in Somalia or Mali or Niger or all these places. But I'm wondering if we get the same amount of votes, and that's sort of the problem because they purposely carved out Al-Qaeda and the Yemen vote. It said only about, and there's been a lot of publicity about the humanitarian disaster, which it gained us more votes too. So I think I'm getting the hook sign. We gotta go. All right, thank you.
All right, if I could please have your attention, we're going to move directly into our congressional panel because there's a vote that they have to run off to. I'd like to introduce them on. Absolutely. Rachel is Congressional Quarterly's Foreign Policy Reporter, where she has worked since 2014, covering the intersection of the Congress and Israel talks to Russia more than prior to that.
Thank you very much for the open mind. Remember, the president needs collegiality to challenge him. I love that president. We need you to keep challenging him. Thank you so much.